Okay, so today I'm in Surrey with Dave Roberts, who we'll describe as a retired seller of jockeys. Thanks very much for giving us some time today, Dave. Um, right, first of all, I want you to tell us about the 218 bus.
The famous story of the 218 bus. That was my childhood when obviously school and I didn't agree and I didn't go to school very much. And I used to skive off school on 2 or 3 afternoons, maybe a fortnight, I'd say. And I'd go and get on the 218 bus from Shepperton to Staines, or wherever the bus was going, whichever meeting was on, Kempton, Sunbury, and go into Sandown was the story which always made me laugh was I'd get off the bus at Sandown Park, walk up to the gate, and then I'd wait for a little old lady to come along who adopted me for those 5 minutes and took me through the turnstile, because in those days you had to obviously have an adult to take you in, and off she went and off I went, and I spent the whole day at Sandown watching the racing, and that was probably the start of it, and that would have been from the age of 10 to 12, around that time.
Was it always the same old lady, or was it any
Oh,
random
any
old
old
lady?
lady. No disrespect to old lady. Any lady who looked like she could have an adopted grandchild.
So I mean, but you must have had an interest in horse racing before you decided to start going. It's sort of a daunting place to go to, Sandown, for anybody, let alone as an 8-year-old.
My dad was a very big follower of racing. From a punting point of view. My mum was a very big follower of racing, more from the form, and she used to buy the yearly time form annual book, the green book, which she had for many years. I've still got them in the storage somewhere. So it came from my mum and dad totally, and all three brothers, myself and my two brothers, we all just always had an interest in horse racing.
Okay, so up until your retirement, was it 2 years ago now?
2 years.
You were the biggest, original, and most successful seller of jockeys in National Hunt racing. I mean, what have you been doing yourself since?
Since retirement, I've always been a mad Chelsea fan for my sins, and I've now, where we've moved to Dorking, I've got a season ticket for the local team, Dorking Wanderers, um, and recently married. We travel a fair bit. We like going to France with my wife, and the big surprise to most people would be is that I am now addicted to the garden and love gardening 12 hours a day if I can get out there.
Now, this must be a big change because you said in the past, I'm referencing Nick Luck's interview with you, you'd sometimes work 20 hours a day when it was the height of the season, spending much of the time on the telephone, starting work at 5:30, etc. I mean, since you've sort of had time to enjoy your time and your money and the garden, have you sort of ever regretted not calling it a day a bit sooner?
When I look back now, I possibly could have retired earlier, but it wasn't the time. I knew that year when I gave up, which obviously 2 years ago, there was kind of a build up to it, and you felt that the mind was perfectly capable of doing the job and getting up at 5:30 and going to bed at 1 o'clock was no issue at all. But the body was telling me it was time to, if I wanted to have any form of life going forward, I just had to take stock. And so, difficult decision, but looking back, definitely the right decision.
Yeah, during those years that you're active, you must have had a bit of a wry smile every time you heard a millennial talking about work-life balance.
Never got it, just never got it. And I've tried to install that in my kids and friends who ask me. And to me, my dad installed it in me from a very young age, and it was, you work hard, you get the rewards. And I never found it a problem starting at 5:30, and sometimes you may not even sleep for more than an hour.
You know, you've already mentioned that it was the mind sort of and the body telling you, but I mean, was there sort of a catalyst or a eureka moment when you thought, right, this is time to finish?
I think, if I'm totally honest, and I hope I'm wrong in a way, I think because I've only really ever done jump racing in later, the last 20 years was jump racing solely. And I think jump racing was struggling as a sport a little bit. And there's a lot more, because it used to be very, it was like the fun side of racing, I always felt. And there was lots of good characters and a lot of enjoyment. And I think it just become slightly, it just seemed like the sport was struggling slightly, and there was a lot of people, there was things going on which I didn't really agree with. So there wasn't one particular point. It was mainly the body, but it just felt the right time. I'd had some great years and the best years of my life, and who could work in a hobby and get the rewards that you got, and the pleasure.
I mean, a couple of years later, now this isn't in the script, but can you elaborate a bit on what you thought was going a bit wrong with it that you didn't like? Because has it got worse now since?
I don't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't say it's got worse since I retired, but I just think it was at a point where the people making decisions were making, from an agent's point of view, there was too much racing to start with. The pressure on the jockeys was too much. You were finding yourself actually where you used to get their rides, and then you'd be a little bit like their go-to, and you'd tell them and try and discuss, if someone was having a bad run, you try and talk them through and say, look, your turn will come, keep working hard. And so you're trying to keep their spirits up. But it just become to me that there was too much pressure on jockeys. That's the only side I can really comment on, because that's what the life was about. But as an agent looking after a jockey, I could see the pressures and the stress that was coming on jockeys, and I thought it was too much.
And how many clients did you have at that point?
I'd say 50 plus, including the young jockeys, 56, 7 when I retired, yeah.
So how did you break it to them? Did you get any sort of warning, or was it just a...
Yep, I rung them individually, every single one of them, probably 3 or 4 weeks before. I went to see the great man AP and told him what I was doing, and his words of advice were always spot on. And it was a difficult decision, because you'd been in charge, or not in charge, but you'd been kind of nurturing their careers for so many years. So I wanted to tell them individually, and I wanted to speak to them. And at that time I said, if you want to discuss with me which agent I think it would be best for you to go with, and any help going forward, I would. And they still ring me now. Not so many, 2 years on, but there's still jockeys who ring me, and one rung me, say, a month ago, and he had a chance to get a job, and which way would you go if you were still doing it? And so I'm always there for any advice they want. I still follow it, maybe not to the level I used to, but it's yeah. So it was. I wanted to tell them individually, and I did, and I was, in a way, I felt quite good about that.
Working as many hours as you did in a day, I mean, were a lot of these relationships purely remote? Did you ever...
Well, there's a lot of the jockeys I never met, and you build up a very good rapport with trainers, and a lot of the trainers I never met, because in the early days you'd go racing 4 or 5 days a week. It was just a total way of the way the rides were booked were different. But when the system changed, you couldn't leave the office. Well, if you were doing your job right, you couldn't leave the office. And the funny story, a quick one I'll tell you, was I went down to Lambourne and played golf for the day, and we all went for dinner in the pub, and AP was sat next to me here, and there was Mick Fitz, and all the boys were there. And a jockey, Brian Crowley, I'd never met, but he'd obviously been told that I was coming down, and he'd come down to meet me. And we're all sat at the table, and I knew what he looked like, but clearly he didn't know what I looked like. And he leant across to AP and said, "What do you think of that Dave Roberts? He hasn't even turned up, and I've driven all the way to come down and see him." And he was literally sat across me, but he wouldn't know what I looked like, probably. So quite funny, But I would say I didn't meet 30% of my jockeys ever.
Did AP put him out of his misery?
I think he took a long time to get over it when he was that embarrassed. Yeah.
Now, I mean, how long would you say you were at that sort of level where you were working so many hours a day you hardly ever left the house?
I mean, that was my choice to work like that. You could go racing. You didn't have to do them hours, but I have got a kind of obsessional temperament. So if I'm going to do something, you're going to put all them hours in. But I would have started, probably I'd have said to become like that in the Adrian McCoy years, and probably the year when Adrian and Richard Dunwoody were fighting for the title, and it was quite intense, you know, from a point of view of getting the rides and fighting for the rides. So probably from that year onwards, and then having lost the title with Adrian on the last day, there was like a trigger that said to me, you know, I've got to have a champion jockey. And that's probably when it started. And there wasn't an hour of the day I wouldn't have been on the phone and just chasing rides, you know, proper rides. But the other thing I would say is, though I was doing a lot of jockeys, and I think people question this, if you take a jockey on, you've got to do the same job for every jockey. Just because it was Adrian McCoy or Tony McCoy, whoever, you do the same job for a young jockey who's starting out claiming 7. So if there's a race for jockeys claiming 7, you're ringing for him as well. You're ringing for all those jockeys. So if you're doing that job right, you probably should be on the phone at least 14 hours a day.
So obviously you were earning decent money doing it, but you basically dedicated your entire life for about 20 years nurturing those jockeys and helping their careers while you were sort of basically a hermit in the office.
I think that sums it up quite well. Yeah, I mean, I think I can't remember who it was. Someone said that it's like you're living in a bunker, and it was. You got up in the morning, you got your first cup of coffee, first of probably 20, and you just went in the office. And from the moment you thought a trainer would be in the yard, you were on the phone, you know, ringing for rides, and you didn't come out until you'd rung every single person. I just used to have lists, and I was known for the highlighters and the coloured pens, but everybody on that list was rung every day. Yeah.
Yeah, so it must have been a passion for you that you enjoyed.
It was definitely a passion, and like I think touched on earlier, it was your hobby as well. So to be able to work in your hobby and to get that much enjoyment, and there was so many good times, and I'm not just saying the winners at Cheltenham or the Grand National, or, you know, there was good times when a perfect example on a Saturday afternoon at Warwick, like Richard Guest I was doing, and he rode a treble at Warwick, and that gives you so much pleasure that you've got 3 winners for a jockey. They were all outside rides. I think one of them was 40-1, one of them was 12-1, and you sit back at the end of the day and think, wow, you know, you've really done a good job there, you know, and the jockey rings you on the way and says, oh, I can't believe it. And it was just, it's a very rewarding job, but obviously the downside is the injuries, and it's, you know, you're looking after their lives, not just their livelihoods.
Yeah, now I'm only going to mention the word once because you don't like it, but what is it about the term agent that you objected to in your career?
I didn't really see myself as an agent. I mean, a couple of friends of mine are sporting agents, and I see them as agents, but I never saw myself as an agent. Um, you know, all I really did was book their rides. Just say if I don't know, AP was flying from Fontwell to Worcester, you know, he had someone who did that for him. I wasn't doing that. All I was doing was making sure he was on the best horse I could possibly get him on in each race. And behind the scenes, shall we say, of advice in their life, or, you know, investing in something, you know, I never got involved with that. It was purely booking rides for jockeys. So I saw that to a trainer that I am a salesman of jockeys to every trainer, and I saw it like that from day one until I retired.